Sometimes a story does not begin with drama or noise. It begins with a quiet moment that feels almost too real to be staged. This was one of those moments where love showed itself without asking permission. The marriage hall was filled with warm lights and soft music, the kind that makes memories feel heavier than the air itself. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and happiness floated easily between tables. Sandra stood near the edge of the hall, adjusting her dress, smiling politely at people who passed her. She looked calm, but inside her heart was racing in a way she could not explain. Keanu noticed it before anyone else did. The slight tension in her shoulders, the way her smile arrived a second too late. He had seen battlefields, chaos, and crowds that screamed his name, but nothing made him more alert than the quiet distress of someone he cared about. He walked toward her slowly, not wanting to draw attention, not wanting to turn a private feeling into a public scene. Sandra tried to steady herself. The marriage hall reminded her of promises, expectations, and old fears she thought she had already healed from. Memories pressed against her chest, and for a moment, the noise around her felt distant, like she was standing underwater. She did not want to ruin the celebration. She did not want anyone to see her struggle. Keanu stopped in front of her, close enough to speak softly. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not demand an explanation. Instead, he reached out, gently pulling her closer, shielding her from the crowd as if the world had suddenly become too loud for her heart. The room seemed to slow. Conversations softened. A few guests noticed, then fell silent, sensing that something deeply human was unfolding. Sandra felt her breath return as she leaned into him, surprised by how safe she felt in that simple gesture. No words were spoken, yet everything was said. But just as she began to relax, her eyes filled with tears she did not expect, and Keanu realized this moment was carrying a weight far heavier than anyone in that hall could imagine. Sandra did not cry loudly. Her tears came quietly, the kind that fall when someone has been strong for too long. Keanu felt the shift in her breathing before he saw the tears. He loosened his grip just enough to look at her face, not to question her pain, but to let her know he was fully present. The music continued to play, but for them it faded into the background. Sandra tried to smile again, embarrassed by the attention she imagined she was drawing. She whispered that she was fine, that it was nothing, that she just needed a moment. Keanu nodded, but he did not step back. He had learned long ago that people often say they are fine when they are standing at the edge of something fragile. He guided her toward a quieter corner of the hall, away from the lights and curious eyes. There, surrounded by soft shadows and distant laughter, Sandra finally allowed herself to speak. She talked about fear, about how love sometimes reminds you of what you could lose, not just what you gain. She admitted that standing in that hall had awakened old wounds, moments when promises were broken and trust felt unsafe. Keanu listened without interrupting. He did not try to fix her feelings or turn them into something prettier. Instead, he shared something of his own, how he once believed strength meant carrying pain alone, until he realized true courage was letting someone see it. His voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of lived experience. Sandra looked at him differently then, not as someone strong rescuing someone weak, but as two people choosing honesty over silence. She felt grounded again, yet a new realization stirred inside her. This moment was changing something between them, something neither had named before. And just as she opened her mouth to say what was suddenly clear in her heart, footsteps approached from behind them, bringing an unexpected presence that would shift the night in a way neither of them saw coming. The footsteps belonged to someone Sandra did not expect to see that night. Her body stiffened before her mind fully caught up, and Keanu felt it instantly. He turned slightly, placing himself just enough in front of her without making it obvious, a quiet instinct he did not even think about. The person stopped a few steps away, their expression polite but uneasy. They offered a congratulations that sounded practiced, hollow, like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. Sandra forced a nod, her hands tightening at her sides. This was not just a guest. This was a reminder of a chapter she had tried to close, a voice that once made her doubt her own worth. Keanu watched closely, reading the tension in the space between them. He did not speak for her. He did not confront the past on her behalf. Instead, he stayed still and grounded, silently giving her the choice to step forward or step away. It was a small act of respect, but it meant everything. Sandra surprised herself. She spoke calmly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. She did not defend herself or explain her past. She simply acknowledged what had been and stated with quiet clarity who she was now. There was no anger in her words, only truth. The person nodded, unsettled by her confidence, then slowly walked away. For a moment, Sandra felt her legs weaken. Keanu reached out, not to pull her close this time, but to steady her, offering support without control. She realized then that resilience did not always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looked like standing your ground without raising your voice. As they returned to the light of the hall, Sandra felt stronger than she had in years. Yet Keanu's expression had changed. There was concern in his eyes, not about her past, but about something he was beginning to understand about her future. And before she could ask what he was thinking, an announcement echoed through the hall, calling her name in a way that made her heart drop. The announcement did not sound dramatic, but it carried authority, the kind that makes a room instinctively quiet. Sandra's name echoed through the marriage hall, followed by a polite request for her presence near the main stage. Conversations paused. A few heads turned. The warmth she had just found inside herself wavered, replaced by a familiar tension. Keanu looked at her, searching her face. "Do you want me with you?" he asked softly, not assuming, not insisting. Sandra hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She did not want to face whatever this was alone, not after everything that had surfaced inside her tonight. They walked together through the crowd. With each step, Sandra felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. The hall that once felt celebratory now felt formal, almost judgmental. Memories from years ago resurfaced, moments when she had stood in front of rooms like this and felt reduced to a version of herself shaped by others. Near the stage stood several people she recognized. Family members, organizers, and a few figures from her professional past. Their smiles were polite but tense. Something was coming, and she could feel it before anyone spoke. One of the organizers cleared his throat and explained that a short speech was needed. A change in the program. A request that Sandra step forward and say a few words about love and commitment, about the meaning of this celebration. The request sounded flattering on the surface, but Sandra understood what lay beneath it. They were putting her on the spot, testing her composure, measuring her worth in front of everyone. Her chest tightened. She was not prepared. She had not agreed to this. She glanced at Keanu, fear flickering across her face. He leaned in slightly and spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "You don't owe them a performance," he said. "Only your truth." Those words grounded her. She realized that this was not a trap unless she allowed it to be. Slowly, she stepped forward. The lights felt brighter now, warming her face, exposing every emotion she was trying not to show. The room waited. Sandra began carefully. She did not recite something polished or rehearsed. She spoke honestly about how love is often misunderstood as perfection when it is really about presence. She talked about fear, about how commitment does not erase uncertainty but teaches you to face it with courage. Her voice trembled at first, but then it steadied, carried by something deeper than confidence. As she spoke, Keanu watched from just behind her. He was not thinking about how she looked or how the room reacted. He was thinking about how much strength it takes to be vulnerable in front of people who once defined you. He felt a quiet pride rise in him, mixed with a protectiveness he could no longer ignore. The room listened. Even those who had doubted her could not deny the sincerity in her voice. When she finished, there was a pause before the applause began, not explosive but respectful, genuine. Sandra exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath the entire time. She stepped down, her legs shaky. Keanu met her halfway, offering his hand. She took it without hesitation. The simple act felt symbolic, like choosing support instead of self-protection. But the night was not done testing them. As they turned away from the stage, Sandra's mother approached. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of pride and concern. She embraced Sandra tightly, whispering words of love, then pulled back just enough to look at Keanu. There was a question in her eyes, one that had waited a long time to be asked. Later, away from the noise, Sandra's mother spoke openly. She admitted her fears, her mistakes, the times she had pushed Sandra toward expectations instead of happiness. It was not an apology wrapped in excuses. It was raw and imperfect. Sandra felt something inside her shift again, another old wound finally finding air. Keanu listened quietly, understanding that this conversation was not his to lead. When Sandra finally spoke, her voice was steady. She did not rewrite the past. She acknowledged the pain and accepted the present. Forgiveness did not arrive as a dramatic moment. It arrived as a decision. As the night deepened, the celebration resumed around them, but Sandra felt different. Lighter, yet aware that something significant was unfolding between her and Keanu. Their connection had moved beyond comfort into something honest and brave. When they stepped back into the hall, a slow song began to play. Couples moved to the dance floor, swaying gently. Sandra hesitated, then looked at Keanu. He smiled softly, extending his hand. They danced without choreography, without performance. Just two people moving in sync, listening more to each other than to the music. Sandra rested her head lightly against his shoulder, feeling a calm she had not known in years. And in that quiet closeness, Keanu realized that what he felt was no longer just care or concern. It was something deeper, something that carried responsibility. He knew that if he stayed silent now, he might lose the chance to be honest with himself. But before he could speak, Sandra felt his breath change, sensed the weight of unspoken words between them. And she wondered whether this night, meant to celebrate someone else's love, was about to redefine her own. The dance ended slowly, as if neither of them wanted to be the first to let go. When the music faded, Sandra lifted her head and looked at Keanu, searching his face for clarity. There was something different in his eyes now. Not urgency, not fear, but a seriousness that felt new and deeply intentional. They stepped away from the dance floor and found a quiet space near an open balcony. The night air was cool, a relief after the warmth of the hall. Below them, the city lights glimmered, distant and steady, like a reminder that life continued beyond this moment. Keanu spoke first, his voice low and careful. He told her that what he felt was not sudden, not a reaction to the night or the emotions surrounding them. It had been building quietly through small moments of trust, shared silence, and respect. He admitted that he was afraid, not of love, but of mishandling something this real. Sandra listened, her heart pounding. She appreciated that he did not make grand promises or dramatic declarations. Instead, he spoke with humility, acknowledging his own doubts and the responsibility that came with caring deeply for someone. She realized that this honesty was what made his words powerful. When she responded, her voice was soft but clear. She admitted that she had spent years protecting herself by staying emotionally distant. Tonight had cracked that armor. She told him that his kindness was not overwhelming or performative. It was steady, and that made it feel safe. They stood there in silence, letting the truth settle between them. No one rushed them. No one interrupted. The world seemed to pause, giving them space to choose what came next. Keanu reached for her hand, not to claim her, but to offer presence. Sandra squeezed his fingers gently, feeling both grounded and vulnerable. She understood that love was not about certainty, but about choosing to show up despite uncertainty. Inside the hall, laughter and music resumed, unaware of the shift happening just beyond the doors. Sandra thought about the fears that had once controlled her, the expectations that had shaped her choices. She felt those influences loosening their grip. Just as Keanu was about to speak again, a sound interrupted them. Hurried footsteps, voices raised, and the balcony door opening with urgency. Someone called out that there had been an incident inside, something unexpected that required immediate attention. Sandra's heart skipped. Keanu turned toward the noise, instinctively moving closer to her. Whatever had happened was pulling them back into the center of the night, into a moment that would test not only their emotions, but their resolve. And as they stepped back inside, neither of them realized that this interruption would force them to make a choice they could no longer delay. The noise inside the hall was no longer joyful. Voices overlapped, confusion replacing celebration. Sandra felt it before she understood it, that tight pull in the chest that comes when something fragile is about to break. Keanu stayed close, not gripping her, just present enough that she knew she was not facing this alone. Near the center of the hall, a small group had gathered. Someone had collapsed, overwhelmed by the evening, by emotion, by expectations that had quietly built up. It was not dramatic, but it was real. Panic had spread faster than help. Sandra moved without thinking. Years of learning to stay composed under pressure surfaced naturally. She knelt beside the person, speaking calmly, grounding them with simple words, reminding them to breathe. Keanu watched her, not surprised, but deeply moved. This was who she was when no one was applauding. Steady, kind, capable. Slowly, the situation eased. The tension dissolved into relief. The crowd stepped back, embarrassed by how quickly fear had taken over. The celebration resumed in fragments, but something had shifted. People were quieter now, more human. As the hall settled, Sandra stood and felt the weight of the night finally catch up with her. Exhaustion mixed with clarity. She realized that everything she had faced tonight, the memories, the confrontation, the speech, the vulnerability, had stripped away a version of herself she no longer needed. Keanu walked with her toward a quieter corner once more. Neither spoke at first. Words felt unnecessary. The night had already said enough. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. She told him that for the first time in a long while, she did not feel like she was performing a role for the world. She felt like herself. She admitted that this scared her because being real meant risking loss. Keanu listened, then shared something he rarely voiced. He spoke about the loneliness that can exist even when surrounded by people, about how fame, admiration, and noise often leave little room for genuine connection. He told her that what drew him to her was not her strength alone, but her willingness to feel deeply without hardening. They stood facing each other, no audience, no stage, just honesty. Keanu did not rush his words. He told her that he could not promise a perfect future, but he could promise presence, respect, and consistency. He asked, not demanded, whether she was willing to explore something real with him without hiding behind fear. Sandra felt tears rise again, but this time they were not heavy. They were freeing. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward anyway. She nodded, then spoke clearly, choosing her words with care. She said yes, not to certainty, but to honesty, yes to showing up, yes to allowing something meaningful to grow. They embraced, not tightly, not dramatically, but with intention. A few nearby guests noticed, then quietly turned away, understanding that this was not a moment meant for observation. Later, as the night came to an end, Sandra stepped outside alone for a moment. The air was cool, grounding. She thought about how the evening had begun with unease and ended with clarity. She realized that love did not arrive as a grand event. It arrived through small acts of kindness, through listening, through choosing courage over comfort. Keanu joined her, standing beside her, looking out at the city lights. He did not speak immediately. Finally, he said that pulling her close earlier in the hall had not been instinct alone. It had been a choice. A choice to protect, to be present, to say without words that she mattered. Sandra smiled softly. She understood now. What had melted everyone in that marriage hall was not romance or spectacle. It was humanity. It was two people choosing compassion over performance, truth over silence. As they walked away together, the hall behind them returned to music and laughter. But something lasting had been created, something quiet and strong. A connection rooted not in grand gestures, but in mutual respect, resilience, and kindness. And long after the night was over, those who witnessed that moment would remember it not as a scene, but as a reminder. That love, when it is real, does not demand attention. It earns it.